Welcome back. Today I'm going to analyze one of the longest games I've ever played, but hopefully this video won't be that long. And I didn't mean longest in number of moves, I meant longest in how much time it took to play this game. This was in one of those daily games that I mentioned in the recent video about how to play daily games, where my opponent took almost all the time that they had for every single move. This happened to be in a tournament that I began right after I joined chess.com. The tournament started on January 1st, 2021, so more than 2 years ago. Now this isn't one of those daily tournaments where you play 2 games at the same time against an opponent. This is one where you play 1 game as white or black, and then when that's completed, then you switch colors and play the same opponent. And it was a 14-day tournament, which means that each player has 14 days to make every single move. My opponent was one of those that would take 12 or 13 days for every single move. Now when that tournament began, my daily rating was 1020. The first game took about 8 months, but there were only 21 moves in the game. I got checkmated on move 21. And then the second game started. But by then I had played and completed quite a few other daily games, and my rating had risen into the 1200s. So by the time this second game started, the one that I'm going to talk about in this video, I was rated, I think, 1237. And this game took even longer than that one. My opponent was rated in the 1400s for both games. But by the time this second game ended, their rating had dropped a little bit into the 1300s. But they were ahead of me the whole time. So let's switch over to the game board and take a look. And this is on move 10. After my opponent has just made their 10th move. Now, obviously during the game, we're not allowed to use engines. My evaluation of this position is that I was behind. I don't know how far behind I thought I was. The only advantage that I thought I had was that I was very close to being able to castle safely. But I wasn't sure how safely because my opponent has a lot of pawns swelling up through the center and just about ready to crush my position. Now, I didn't think that I was lost, but I did think that I was behind. The engine here shows that I'm only behind the normal amount after about 10 moves into the opening, 0.48. Now, the game review shows a little bit higher. I have adjusted my game review settings, but there is still a slight difference. But even plus 1.21 isn't a huge significant advantage right out of the opening for players at my level, but I felt more like it was a +2 here. My knight can't really go anywhere. Once I castle, it would be able to drop back. But both of those pawns are defended, this pawn's defended, these pawns are defended, this bishop has just moved up to help defend this pawn, and maybe once that pawn moves, their bishop's going to be pointed down here at my rook in the corner on a8. If I take and they take back, that's just going to open up a file for their rook, and I haven't even developed my light-squared bishop yet. So like I said, I thought the only advantage that I might have here was that I was about to castle, whereas my opponent has pushed so many pawns, they're probably not going to be able to castle. So I thought that they probably had a hope of trying to lock up the center here, and I had no idea what I was supposed to play. The engine here is suggesting I should play queen to c7. The only thing that I can think of that would help is it gets out of the way of my b-pawn. Maybe then I can move my b-pawn to one of those 2 squares and then develop my light-squared bishop. The engine actually says that after I played that, my opponent should castle, despite having moved all those pawns. That's a surprise to me. And it says then I would play d5. I didn't want to play d5 because I thought then they would push this e-pawn, and then where would my knight go? My knight would probably have to go back. But anyway, what I played, and this was probably back in November or December of 2021, or very early 2022, because this game started in September of 2021. So this was either late that year or early the next year. I played d5 now. Now I know that that's a mistake because, of course, they can push this. It says that that's their 3rd best move, but I think if they played that now, then I would have to drop the knight back. No, oh no, it says if they played that, I could put the knight in the middle on e4. Okay, but their best move is to take here. But they didn't. They played that. And I did put my knight in the center. So I guess I was doing okay here. Now this has been a long time. This isn't like a game that I played last night that I can remember why I thought of each move. This is a game that I played back when I started this game at rated 1237 or something like that. I finished it at 1332, which is shown at the bottom there. I just finished this a few weeks ago, and I put it on my list so I can make a video out of it. But I can see why I would have played that. It does attack the queen. If they take with their bishop, then I've got a pawn right there across the center line, I guess. It is their best move to take it, and they did. And of course, it's my best move to take back, which I did. I still thought I was behind here for the same reason as before. All of those pawns pushed forward. Again, the only downside I saw in my opponent's position is that, are they going to castle behind all those pushed pawns? Here it is my opponent's turn, and the computer says they should take this pawn, which would be threatening my queen protected by their dark-squared bishop, and I would take with my knight. And I would think at that point they would want to play b4, threatening my knight, which is kind of pinned because of their bishop here. But it says that they wouldn't do that. It says that they would then play knight to g3, I guess going after this pawn, the e pawn that I've just put there. But instead, my opponent played b4 first, which is a mistake and takes us almost to even. I didn't realize we were even here, and I'm supposed to take it with my c pawn. I didn't think of that, and I'm not sure why. I don't think I can use the excuse that I was worried about them pushing this pawn with a discovered attack on my queen, because what I did was push this pawn forward, which has the same problem. So I'm not sure what my thought process here was, but I did play that. I guess the idea was to just exert more pressure over squares on the other side of the board. Now here it does say that they should have played d5, which would have opened up this discovery, and that would have forced me to play the move that I should have played earlier. But instead they played a4. So this is one of those opponents that probably would beat me a lot in bullet and blitz, because I face a lot of opponents who throw all their pawns forward in bullet and blitz, and I'm never sure exactly how to respond to this. Now it says I should play queen to c6, although I'm not sure exactly what the idea of that is other than protecting this pawn. Looks like I could be attacked pretty easily from there, but all I saw was my queen was about to get smothered here, so I dropped my queen back, all the way back, and that turns out to be an inaccuracy. They played their best move, which was knight to a3. Now, again, this is one of those opponents who plays like every 13 days. And so when I come back to this, it's been almost 2 weeks since the last time I saw it. And I have to evaluate the position fresh. And as you can see, I'm making some inaccuracies. My opponent is too, but then occasionally they'll find a move like that that at the time I thought was maybe a little ridiculous, but it turns out that that was their best move. What I'm supposed to play here is b5. I guess I can see that, since because they've already put this knight here blocking their rook, that this pawn wouldn't be pinned anymore. So if I did play b5 and they took, I could take back. Wait, but then if they took, they would lose the rook, so they wouldn't take, because those two pawns would be out of the way. Yeah, so I think the knight moving to a4 did allow this, but it still leaves my opponent with an advantage, and it does say that they would take and I would take back, but then they would castle, and then their rook would not be undefended anymore, so that they could move the knight to take that pawn. My second best move is to play queen to c7, which apparently I should have played some time ago, or castle. Again, I was a little hesitant about castling into all of these pawns, and I made a mistake here, seeing this diagonal open with their king. And that's often one of the downsides of moving all those pawns in front of where you should normally want a castle, is that you can get checked on that diagonal. Here, however, the opponent can easily stop that. I just didn't see that, and I checked. It's actually not a mistake, it's an inaccuracy, but it puts me as behind as I thought I was anyway. They did block with the bishop, and not sure what to do, I just brought the queen back. Again, thinking I was lost, this is an opponent who checkmated me on move 21 in the first game we played. They're still rated 100 or 200 points higher than me. Well, of course, I have a hanging pawn here. They're supposed to take it, and they did. And my best move is to castle, and I did. And here, according to the game review and the engine, I think this is as far behind as I got in this game. But I thought I was lost, and I decided to just play crazy stuff. It is my opponent's turn, and again, the engine says they should castle. I think just like I would have been, they were hesitant to castle behind these pawns that have already been pushed, and the center is kind of locked up, so maybe they thought their king would be safe here behind these, fairly worthwhile pieces. Maybe at some point they were thinking of bringing the rooks in and making a peace fortress around the king. I don't know. But instead, they saw that I had castled in front of all those pushed pawns, so they pushed their h-pawn. And that took away a little bit of their advantage. The engine says I should play knight to b6 here, and that they wouldn't trade for it. Oh, it says it would be better for them to hop their knight into the middle, protected by this pawn, which is itself protected by two pawns. I think most of the people that I play would have taken right there, knowing that they're already a pawn ahead and have all these advanced pawns, but the engine says they would have played here, and maybe they would have because this opponent seemed fairly advanced. Well, as I said, I thought I was probably lost at this point. The game review thinks +2. The engine here says +1.2. I was thinking more like +4 at this point. And so I just decided, let's rip open this center. I'm going to start pushing pawns right here and see if we can break some of this open. Because, once I push f6, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces guarding f6. So that's what I played. Well, it says that's excellent, even though it wasn't one of the moves suggested. But again, my idea was if they took, I had multiple ways of taking back, and then maybe I could start breaking through here somehow, some way. And if they didn't take back, I could take back and start breaking through somehow, some way, especially since I've castled and I would have, or begin to have some open files or semi-open files. My opponent's supposed to play h5 here, or queen to c2, which I guess lines up with this pawn. Or again, knight to d6, putting their knight in here on this outpost square. But instead they decided to bring their other knight, which that takes us back close to even, but I'm not sure why. And I had said that if they didn't take this pawn, that I was going to take this one next. But what I did see here was that they have an undefended knight here, and it turns out to be my second best move to go after it. What I didn't see is that they could come in here with it. But I did go after that. But instead of playing knight to d6, I guess they didn't see this outpost either. They dropped their knight back, which turns out to be a mistake. And by move 20, we're even. And of course, again, I had no idea. But now I took this pawn. Because now that their knight has dropped back, there's an extra thing not defending that square. Their knight used to be over here defending e5, and it's not defending it anymore. Now, of course, they still have 2 pawns on it, and now I have tripled pawns, which is usually not a good idea at all. Of course, I thought they were going to take care of one of them for me, but again, we're opening this up, and they haven't castled yet. That was the only thing that I could think of, and unlike my opponent, I wasn't going to use the strategy of waiting 13.5 days to make every move, but I was just going to use the strategy of continuing to play and force them to beat me. Now, they did take back with the f-pawn, which turned out to be their best move, but the good thing for me about this, I guess, is that it opens up this f-file, so my rook is shooting down through there now. Bad thing for me is I have doubled pawns, one of which looks like never going to go anywhere. But I thought, what is a good way to get rid of this situation? If I'm already lost, and again, had no idea that I've gotten it back to even yet, thinking I'm lost here, I realized I have 3 pieces pointed at that square, and they only have one thing defending it. So if I take one of these minor pieces, and I'm already down a pawn, but my advantage here is going to be breaking open the center. It's the only thing I could think of. And I had, about this time, I was reading through one or the other of the Jeremy Silman books, so I was kind of learning about things like when you want the center locked and when you want the center open. I still don't understand pawn breaks, but I did understand that the center here is blocked up, and I thought I could break it open by giving away a minor piece. I wasn't sure which one to start with, the knight or the bishop. It turns out that the bishop is the best move, and that's what I played. That turns out to be brilliant. Okay, well, now I'm pretty proud of that. At the time, I was frustrated that I was in such a situation. Interestingly enough, it's not their best move to take back. Their best move, according to the engine, is knight to e2. And I have no idea why. Very close is to take this pawn at the front that's not defended. Since I just took a pawn and they can take a pawn, and it'd still be up a pawn, even if they don't take back this bishop. But it's not that much worse to take the bishop, and again, that's what I assumed that they would do, so they did that. Probably not a good idea to take this with my queen, just because, as usual, you don't want to get your queen out there in front of everything, and maybe the reason for the knight to e2 idea before was so that the bishop could get here and be pointing down this diagonal. I have no idea. But my plan all along, what little plan that there was to speak of, was to take this pawn with the other minor piece after they took back, so that's what I did. Again, have no idea that we're close to even. I'm a little startled that Stockfish says their best move is king to f1. I don't know why. But what I do know, I know why. I just figured it out. That's why. Because my rook is guarding this spot, none of their pieces are guarding that spot, and my knight can go there. And they have 2 pieces that I would attack. So their only move that's not a mistake here is king to f1. Well, all those times that the engine said they should castle here, it doesn't say that now. But for some reason, my opponent here got the idea that they should castle. And it might be because they saw the fork coming. Maybe that's what it was, is that they saw this fork and they decided to castle, but they castled the other way, which turns out to be a blunder. Game Review says -3, Stockfish here says -2. Either way, it's bad. Well, I can't do my fork here anymore because the king has moved. I could go there and threaten the queen, but I could also check here and hit that bishop, which is a fork of the rooks. And when I saw that, I didn't know that my opponent had blundered by castling, or if they had blundered by pushing all of those pawns forward, and I just now was finding the advantage in that. I had no idea what the situation was, but I thought I could check here. My pawn would be protecting the knight, so they wouldn't take it with their queen. They would move the king, and then I could take that bishop with either the knight or the rook, because they're both looking at that square, and if I took with the rook, it would be pointed at their queen. Now, I was kind of hoping, and I know you shouldn't play hope chess, but I was kind of hoping that when I put the knight there, they would put the king behind the queen. Now, this is a 1400 rated opponent. They're probably not going to do that, but if they did, then when I took the bishop with my rook, the queen would be pinned and I would win it. So I checked. That turns out to be a great move. They're supposed to move the king over one, but they did what I had been hoping they would do when I put my knight there and went behind the queen. So I was pretty confident. I didn't think there was a trick. There's not really a trick to this, is there? Maybe I'm winning now. Maybe I was winning the whole time and never knew it. So I take this, and they've lost their queen, except that they can block with the knight. That's their best move. Their second best move is to take here. Now, I'm pretty sure if it had been me, I would have put that knight there. I'm not sure why they didn't think of that. This knight clearly can go right here. Now, I'm up 1 point of material at this point, so I'm not going to go down the exchange. In fact, Stockfish says if they had put that knight here, my best move would have been bishop to d7. I probably wouldn't have found that. And I don't know. There might have been some other move that would have been mildly winning or something. But you know what else I just realized? I didn't see this during the game. If they did block that, I have this check here because that pawn is pinned. If I remember right, I did see that a little bit later, but I didn't see it here. But they didn't block with that knight. They took the pawn, which was their second best move. Well, that gives me their queen. Stockfish says that's not my best move. Oh no, it's changed its mind. It was saying this was my best move. It wasn't. Oh no, it's changed again. Knight captures b4 check is my best move at this point. It says go ahead and take an extra pawn and then take their queen. But taking their queen now is pretty close. And that, of course, if I'm given the opportunity to take a queen for a lesser piece, I'm going to do it. Almost always. Unless it gives up mate or something. So I took it. King took back. No, wait. No, Stockfish says the king should take back. But the rook is the second best move. Okay. Now I saw the pin. That pawn on c3 is pinned. I saw it, so I checked. It's an extra pawn. Their king has to go. Their king didn't go to one of the 4 best squares. Well, now my knight's under attack, so I have to move it someplace. I move it here because I went up the exchange by taking the queen, I know I can trade and I'll be fine. Even if they pick up an extra pawn from this, I'll be okay. Also, I figured they would take that pawn, but once they do, then this pawn's undefended and that comes with check. They did take that knight, and I did take back, but they checked instead of taking that pawn. I guess this was smart because it guards that pawn. And I wasn't sure here, but I thought there might be some trick. Because I haven't developed my light squared bishop yet, so my rook's not guarding any of these squares down here. So I was pretty sure I shouldn't go to g7. And I'm looking at the suggested moves by Stockfish, and yeah, it doesn't mention g7 at all in the top 3 moves. If I went to g7, which gets closer to the knight, I thought they could go here, and then they would win my queen. Not even for a knight, they would just win the queen outright. I was pretty sure that was losing, but I'm going to do it here to see what Stockfish says. Yeah, that would have given the advantage back to them. Okay, I thought so. Other than that, I think I only have 3 choices, h8, f7, or f8. It says they all still leave me with an advantage, but I remember thinking hard about this one. I remember seeing that possible fork, and I knew I had to be careful. I also thought, where's a place that they can't check me again? If I go to f8, they could check me again. I think I didn't realize that I would be able to capture it with the queen at that point. I was also a little worried that their next move might be hitting this pawn, which would be an attack on my queen. And I wanted to make sure that when they did that, I wasn't in check at that point. So anyway, I chose king to h8, which turns out to be the best move. Now here they don't have a lot of good choices, but what they did was take that pawn in the middle, which turns out to be one of their top 3 moves, maybe their best move. It's a free pawn and it attacks my queen, so it comes with a tempo. I have to do something, except I don't have to move my queen. Remember earlier when I talked about that pawn getting out of the way, I could get this pawn with check. And I had seen that back when I put my knight there thinking about that knight trade. And so I was able to do that. That saves my queen for a moment, forces them to have to do something. They moved their king to c1. Sorry, the engine says queen to c5 is my best move. Or c4, or c6. One of those 3 squares. I'm not sure why any of those would be better than what I chose. What I chose was queen to a5. Now my reasoning for that was, I think, relatively simple. That pawn's undefended. So if I put my queen on a5, not only am I threatening this pawn, which they can only defend by moving the rook over, so I'm going to win that pawn. Because if they move the rook over, I would get their knight, right? So that looked like a pretty good move to me. I'm attacking this pawn, probably going to win it, because the only way they can defend it is to give up the knight. How bad was that? Okay, it still left me with -5. So almost as good as the 3 that were shown there. My opponent played rook to d4, which is something I missed on the previous turn. It turns out that they can defend that pawn and the knight at the same time. So that was a good find on their part, even though it wasn't listed among their best moves. Also, it attacks the bishop. I have a couple of pretty easy ways to defend the bishop. One is to go right here to h5, which is defended by the pawn and blocks one of their few remaining pawns. Could go to f5 with the bishop, which cuts off a couple of squares very close to their king, and of course would be protected by the pawn and in turn protect the pawn. The engine says f3. The reason for that, I think, is because it attacks this undefended rook, and you can trade the bishop for this knight. And being a material, that's not a bad trade, right? That's what I found. I'm pretty proud of that. Even the engine said that was the best move and I found it. Okay, that doesn't happen every day. My opponent put their knight here. That keeps my queen from seeing this pawn. Continues defending the knight but I'm not sure where they had planned to go after that. And I think the problem with that is that they didn't see that I was attacking 2 pieces. So I'm not sure exactly why they chose that. Their best move here was to move this rook. Rook to h3, rook to h2, rook h to d1. I don't know why that would have been a good move, because my bishop is still aiming there. But they shouldn't have just left it where it was. But by moving that knight, that just gave me the rook. And is that my best move? Yeah, it was my best move to take the rook, because that's just a free piece. It wasn't even the trade I was hoping for with the knight. Okay, they moved their king up here, I guess, to protect this pawn. This pawn's undefended, by the way. I don't know if my opponent was trying a trick when they moved the knight here, which blocked their rook's defense of their a-pawn, because then if I took it, maybe they could skip their knight somewhere interesting, and then, but they couldn't check or anything else, so I think I would have just escaped with my queen at that point. And maybe what they were trying here with their king and their knight and all these pieces, maybe they were thinking that they could trap my queen. I don't think they can, because I just have a lot of squares that I can move it to. And if I took that pawn, I still have a lot of squares, I think, that I could get my queen to. And now that I've taken their rook, I would probably be okay trading my queen for their rook. Here my best move is to take that pawn, and I took it. And now I'm up -30. Now I will say that I have given the advice a lot to people at my level to never resign. Well, this opponent has definitely heard that advice and took it, in addition to their plan of taking 13 days to make every move. Around this point, I started using the conditional pre-moves, which are something that are found in daily and correspondence games that aren't in live games. In live games, bullet, blitz, rapid, you can do pre-moves. But that's just moving a piece. No matter what the opponent does, that's going to be your next move as long as it's legal at that point. But in daily games, you can do conditional pre-moves. That means whatever you think your opponent might play. So let's say I think my opponent might play h5. Actually, the engine says that that's their best move. So if they play h5, oh, it says if they did, I should just move my rook over. Well, I went ahead and said in the conditional pre-moves, if they play h5, I'm just going to take it. And I had that set so that I wouldn't have to waste a few more hours after my opponent had wasted 13 days making their move. Whenever they made their move, mine would happen instantaneously. And I think you can set up to 5 lines. And I set several here. Their king has very few choices. Their knight has few choices. But I just wanted to note that at this point in the game, I started setting conditional pre-moves. And every time I noticed that the time had changed on the game, that meant that they had moved and my conditional pre-move had happened, I would go in there and see if I still had another set of conditional pre-moves waiting. And if not, I would set more and try to think of all the possible or the best possible moves, the moves that they might think of, and then I would set another conditional pre-move. So from here on out, I don't think maybe once or twice did I ever have to make an actual move in the game after seeing what my opponent had done. I think there was once or twice where they surprised me by their move, and so I had to go and make a move in response and then set up more conditional pre-moves. But from here, it was just a matter of being careful and not hanging my queen, and also finally getting my rook out at some point. They brought their king back. I finally did bring my rook out. Of course, that pawn's undefended. They brought their king up to defend the pawn. Stockfish says I have a mate in 13 if I'll just put my queen on a3 or a1. Okay, I see that because my rook's aiming at this pawn, and both of those queen moves would aim at that pawn as well. Maybe that's what I should have done, but I just wanted my queen out of where it was. I brought it down here. Also, I know I have a bishop that can come in here at any point. That turned out to not be good at all. It's now back to -9 instead of a mating sequence, but that's okay. I'll just move through the next few moves here. I was hoping for a rook trade, but instead they just moved it, which turned out to be inaccurate. Gives me a mating sequence again. Bishop to f3. Oh, I mean, I guess that sets up a check here while also threatening their rook. I should have found that. But instead, I just traded the rook for the knight. Stockfish says that's inaccurate, or the game review says that's inaccurate, but I figured I was ahead enough on material that I could trade the rook for the knight and I would be okay. And that's what we did. I checked, they blocked, I checked over here, which is a fork with the rook. Now just note, they can't block with the rook because I have a bishop here. So I would get the rook either way. So as soon as they moved their king, my queen moved and took the rook because I had set up that conditional pre-move. And now it's just a matter of trapping them down here, which I did. I cleaned off that last pawn just so I wouldn't have to worry about it. They're trapped on these bottom 4 ranks. They come down, I come over, trapping them in the lower right quadrant. They only have a few moves, and every time I set my conditional pre-moves, one thing I was very careful of is making sure that they had legal moves, because I knew that my pawns were guarding these squares. I knew that my queen's cutting off these squares, and these squares, and these squares. So I had to make sure their king does still have places it can go. But the king does still have places it can go. In fact, I figured it would probably be okay if it went over here and just went back and forth between those two squares until I could get my pieces over there. So this is what we did. And that's the end of the game. So I was very happy to have beaten a higher rated opponent, one who frustrated me for months by waiting 13 days every time to make their move. And also, I was pretty happy that I pulled out of that losing situation at the beginning. As I said, even before I was actually behind, I thought I was behind. I had no idea what had gone wrong, and I decided to get reckless. When I took that pawn, that turned out to be my brilliant move. This situation right here, back on move 21. And I've noticed that's happened to me a few times when I thought I was lost, and I just said, you know what, let's just break this open and have some, make it sloppy and have some fun. One of those moves turns out to be brilliant or great. In this case, that turned out to be brilliant, so I'm pretty proud of that, even though I didn't know it at the time. And I had no idea that what I was setting up was getting the knight in here to fork them, which my opponent saw and castled, but then it also allowed my knight in here, which allowed me to take the bishop and win their queen. I will say this, I had no idea those things were coming when I took this pawn here. Stockfish did, which is why it says that that was a brilliant move. But yes, in terms of time, this was the longest game I've ever played. It began in September of 2021 and didn't end until May of this year, 2023. So that's more than a year, something like 19 months. But anyway, that's what you get into if you enter a tournament where there are 14 days to make a move and there's no and vacation is allowed. So if you do play daily games and you're thinking about entering a tournament, make sure it says no vacation and make sure it's 3 days or less, something like that. Thank you for spending your time here. Hopefully I can make brilliant moves like this in my live games, and hopefully you can too. I'll see you next time.